Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to Female Geographer's Corner. It's an informative space that highlights the work of female geographers from around the world and raises awareness for their contributions to the society. To end the academic year, we present this fascinating interview with my colleague Ana Espinosa. As you know, you can listen to all of the interviews conducted since 2020 on our YouTube playlist. Anna, you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Aspen, and also thank you, Tiffany, for saying yes to our interview. So this interview started some months ago when I was talking to two of our common students between our students of Gustavo's college in Minnesota who came to Alicante, and they were talking about you. They were talking very nicely about you, and I just listened. She is a geographer. She's on energy, geographies of energy and peace. And I think immediately I had this desire to get you interviewed. I asked Aspen if she would like to interview you, and of course, both of us asked you if you wanted to participate in our Women's Geographer's Corner. So thanks very much for saying yes and for being part now of this space of dissemination.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for having me. It's an honor, and I love this series that you do. It's very, very inspiring. So thank you.
Thanks.
So before we start with the questions, we would like you to introduce to our audience. So Tiffany Grobelski is a human geographer and social legal scholar who examines energy conflict, social movements-led energy transition, and how grassroots movements build what she calls infrastructure of peace. She holds an assistant professor position at Gustavus Adolphus College in St. Peters, Minnesota, USA. Sorry, Minnesota, right? So it's not Minnesota.
Either way is fine.
There, she has a joint appointment in the Peace, Justice, and Conflict Studies program and the Department of Environment, Geography, and Earth Sciences. Tiffany earned her PhD in geography as well as a graduate certificate in law and society studies from the University of Washington, Seattle. Her doctoral research examined how environmental advocates in Poland mobilize administrative law to achieve their goals. She has analyzed how the grassroots anti-smog movement contributed to Poland's energy transition away from coal. Immediately after graduate school, Tiffany served as an asylum officer for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. In that role, she adjudicated hundreds of asylum seekers' cases and gained experience in non-adversarial trauma-informed interview techniques. You have to explain us what means trauma-informed interview technique because we don't have an idea.
Of course, I will.
Since then, Tiffany has received training in conflict management and mediation from the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies at Conrad Grebel University College in Ontario, Canada. Tiffany works at the intersection of energy geography and peace studies. Her goal is to bridge these two fields. Her recent projects focus on energy conflicts in Minnesota, North America, including controversies over the Line 3 oil pipeline and over wind electricity generation. Tiffany positions her research and teaching in solidarity with grassroots movements from energy justice and self-determination. Tiffany currently serves as the co-chair of the Energy and Environment Specialty Group of the American Association of Geographers. So I think you are the most prepared, and we are completely willing to know more about what means geographies of energy and peace. And now is the moment where Aspen will ask the first two questions. So thanks again, Tiffany.
It's Tiffany, nice to meet you. The honor is for us to having this interview with you in the Female Corners Geographer. Okay, the first question is, when did you know you wanted to become a geographer?
Yeah, so, I think probably a lot of people say this, that geography found them instead of them finding geography. So basically, when I was an undergraduate, I I actually first wanted to be a creative writing major. I wanted to write fiction. And then I was always kind of an environmentalist since high school. So I was an environmental sciences, excuse me, major. But my mentor at Northwestern University, who just retired after being there for over 50 years, his name is John Hudson. He was a geographer, and he was like the last geographer at Northwestern, because during his career, a lot of geography programs actually closed in the US. But anyway, he was my mentor, and he is the one who kind of convinced me to pursue graduate studies in geography, because I was pursuing, research projects at that time that were geographical. And the other thing was, I never fit in anywhere. I've always been very interdisciplinary, and I think geography is, kind of interdisciplinary and capacious enough to incorporate so many interests. And so that's why, if I fit anywhere, perhaps I fit in geography. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. The second question is, once you finish your studies in geography, were you clear about what you wanted to specialize in?
Yeah, I went to graduate school at the University of Washington in Seattle, and I was kind of lucky to be part of not only a geography program, but a program that's called Law, Societies, and Justice. And so this is a very kind of powerful unit of the university that studies law in society and how law operates in society, not just kind of the way lawyers study law, which is like law on the books. And so at that time, right as I got out, kind of was finishing graduate school and doing my dissertation, I was really framing my work as, legal geography. So thinking about the relationship between space, law, and society. And I've always been sort of interested in questions of environmental movement work. So I think the only thing that's kind of changed a little bit recently is that I'm framing it more as, instead of environmental movements, I'm framing it more as energy-related social movements. And also what's kind of new is the addition of peace and conflict studies, which is kind of a newer area of exploration. But I always wanted to study environmental governance, environmental movements, and I'm still looking at some scalar politics and the politics of scale related to those, and also how non-state actors mobilize law to meet their goals. And that's not just formal law, but also informal legal discourses like rights language and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I think the specialization is always evolving a little bit, but it's kind of always been there, even though I've called it different, even though I've framed it slightly differently each season, I guess, of my career.
Thank you. And I think it's also interesting for us from our Spanish point of view to have to know how other countries or other people are just trying to include geographical studies in other topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So before we start now with the core part of the interview, we would like you to explain to our audience what geographies of energy and peace are, and what are you studying or what are you teaching. And we will share also at the end of the interview in YouTube the guide to energy geography that you published at the Gustavus Adolphus College. So you wrote that energy is integral to social and spatial relationships, linking physical and human factors. So which makes energy a geographical issue, and absolutely a geographical issue. So how are the topics of peace and energy so intertwined, and how do you connect them in your research?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's an ongoing process, the connecting the fields, but that is the whole purpose of my current kind of position, is to connect the subfield of energy geography with peace and conflict studies, which is its whole own interdisciplinary field. But basically, so the subdiscipline, I guess, of energy geographies looks at a whole host of issues related to energy. And, you know, one basic thing is that energy resources are distributed unevenly across space. So, you know, in some places there are, let's say, fossil fuel resources or better wind resources, more or less than others. So there's a kind of a physical, geographical component to energy geography, but at the same time, and I'm quoting Martin Pasqualetti here, who's kind of one of the fathers of, I would say, of our subdiscipline, who wrote this book called The Thread of Energy. And this is what I repeat to my students all the time. Energy is a social issue with a technical component and not the other way around. So, you know, and so conflicts arise over energy partially because it's spread around unevenly around the world and across geographic space, but energy is something we all need to live as humans. And that could be something as basic as food energy, all the way through to electricity, heating, cooling, etc., mobility, the ability to move around, the ability to turn on lights and study at night, etc. So conflict kind of arises because some people or groups control or have those resources or control their distribution, or make profit off of them at the expense of other people and groups and places. So there's kind of this uneven geography of energy, both physically and socially, and it's you know, this issue is imbued with social and political power as well. And the other problem is that, you know, energy is a commodity and treated as a commodity that can be bought or sold. And this creates a lot of inequalities and problems. So there's a lot of justice issues that arise with energy, a lot of environmental justice issues, political justice issues. So a lot of conflict can arise. And the question is sort of like, how do we use conflicts around energy, especially as we're thinking about transition, to build a more peaceful society? So we're not just substituting, you know, one technology for another as we decarbonize, but we're actually changing the social system surrounding energy systems to, the hope is, make the world a better place. So these are kind of the issues that I teach a lot about with my undergraduate students. We talk about how there's no perfect energy source, that every energy source, even if it's so-called renewable, has problems potentially, and justice or injustice dimensions. And then in my own work, you know, I really focus on the work of grassroots social movements and the ways that they are trying to build more peaceful, more democratic energy systems. So part of energy transition is transitioning our society into a more just and equal society. And so there's always an opportunity, in my view, with any energy conflict, there's an opportunity to transform that conflict into something that, you know, leads to a much more socially and environmentally sustainable system. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, but again, I tried to publish that library guide. It sounds like we can link to it with the video to try to explain what geographies of energy are. And it's truly an interdisciplinary field as well. And I think there's more work to be done to connect the peace side of it. So connecting not just geographies of energy, but also geographies of peace and conflict. So that's kind of the path I'm trying to carve as I move forward in my current role here at Gustavus.
Thanks, it's very interesting. Okay.
Tiffany,
In
sorry,
2019, I'm sorry, Anna.
no, just answer one question. Is there many people in the US working in the same field of expertise as you are? So those who are in your group from the American Association, they're also working connecting peace with energy, or this is something more new? This is something newer.
There are a small number. I would say it's newer. I would say so the Energy and Environment Specialty Group of the AAG, we currently have about 300 to 400 members. We're pretty small. And within that, maybe there are a handful of people. I know at our most recent conference, for example, we had a very interesting speaker, Muna Dajani. She's actually at the London School of Economics, I believe is her affiliation. She gave a talk on Palestine and the ways in which some of the ways that Israeli expansion of so-called green infrastructure is in fact a form of, green genocide. And so that for me, we're starting, as the world unfortunately deteriorates in terms of peace and conflict, we're seeing more and more people make this connection between energy and peace that's a bit more nuanced than just the classic kind of geopolitics of energy, like wars over oil. Now we're seeing a lot more very interesting work. Another person that writes about this is Alexander Dunlap, about how even so-called renewable energy is actually just sustaining very violent kind of systems in various places. So that's another thing I tell my students is like, a wind turbine farm is not a categorically good thing. We have to see whose land is it built on? Who is it benefiting? Who is losing from it? Is it sustaining forms of violence against indigenous people? And so on and so forth. So I would say it's a very newer field in terms of articulating it this way. But that being said, a lot of energy geographers write about this in different ways. So I think it's on us to just start making more explicit connections between people that do this work. I think would be the goal, at least would be my goal. I noticed you laughed when I said we're a small group of 300. I was curious why.
For the Spanish standards, you are great. I don't know how many, our National Geographical Association, how many members do we have? But maybe we have the same that your group of energy. I don't know.
Okay, I see. Well,
Okay.
all relative.
In American, everything is bigger, right?
Yeah.
The following answer is, in 2019, you got a Fulbright US student research grant. The scholarship gave you the opportunity to live 1 year in Poland and be affiliated to the University of Warsaw for carrying out research about air pollution grassroots movements in Poland. Can you explain better your experience and the results of your research, please?
Yeah, so actually the Fulbright grant I received a bit earlier. That was right after I undergraduate. And so I was studying something called the IPPC directive, which European listeners probably are familiar with. It stands for the Integrated Pollution Prevention and Control Directive. And at that time, it was sort of a new holistic form of environmental permitting that was being implemented in Poland, as opposed to having a separate air permit, water pollution permit, etc. The idea was to tie these together and get a full picture of, if you're cleaning one part of your industrial operation, is that waste just being moved to another area? So that was the research I did right after undergrad. And that's when my undergrad advisor said, hey, you know what? You should probably go to grad school. If you're doing independent research anyway, you should probably continue this under some kind of institutional support. So that project was all about the politics of scale and kind of looking at the different levels of European Union level, Polish national level, subnational level, and the ways in which the environmental governance system was sort of changing at various levels due to this kind of EU level change. And that was kind of the precursor to my graduate research, and where I got another federal grant called the Boren Fellowship. And I spent another year in Poland in 2013 to 14 looking at environmental activists, environmental advocates, and how they were using European Union or other legal instruments to achieve their goals. And so I was studying something that I ended up calling administrative legal consciousness, which is basically how these activists thought about law as a tool for change, and how they learned how to effectively use it. Because I guess, you know, the idea was that being in the EU since 2004 for Poland gave activists this opportunity structure that wasn't there before. And so they had more tools to pressure and put pressure on domestic situations. So I looked at, yeah, I really was inspired by the case of the anti-air pollution activism in southern Poland, started by this group called Krakowski Alarm Smogowy. Very small group, started as a Facebook group in southern Poland. They had heavily polluted air because of the low quality coal burning that was going on to heat homes in the winter, and also because of the location in a valley. So there would be inversions and the pollution would be trapped in the area. And so this group has been incredibly successful in transitioning Poland's coal-based heating system into, and this was accelerated, by the way, by Russia's reinvasion of Ukraine recently, as Poland has always been concerned about their kind of geopolitical energy security situation. But this group has been extraordinarily successful at building a huge national coalition and movement to improve the air quality, change the energy system, change the narrative about coal in Poland, which is coal, even though it's a different source of coal, also is a huge contributor to the electricity system in Poland too. So they've really changed the dominant narrative around coal in Poland. And they've had a huge impact on national energy policy. So it's actually a success story. And I love to highlight the successes of grassroots social movements and the ways that they use different levels and scales to kind of meet their needs. So they created really a new nationalist and patriotic narrative around air quality in Poland that is a counter narrative to the, you know, Poland runs on coal narrative. So they're incredible. They've done incredible work.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. So in 2025, you published the article Changing the Coal Status Quo Through Scalar Practices, the Anti-Smog Movement's Contribution to Polish Energy Transition. And it was in the journal Politics and Space. And you talk about energy use transformation by focusing on the coal benefits of energy transition. So I would like to quote some ideas, and maybe they're a bit long, but I think they're interesting. So mobilizing against air pollution, in contrast with campaigning against greenhouse gas emissions, can generate public engagement and passion. Air pollution is a way people experience energy in a visceral way. Heating, cooling, and mobility and resulting pollution are energy facets intimately tied with sensory experiences, and they are meaningful windows into energy transition processes and opportunities areas for societal mobilization. So that reminds me to what British sociologist Elizabeth Shaw has repeatedly argued about energy consumption within the social practice theory, which is very popular in the UK. So people do not use energy for its own sake. They use it as part of accomplishing social practices at home or at work or in moving around. So can you explain us why using energy and changing our patterns of energy consumption can be so difficult but so effective at the same time?
Mm-hmm.
It's a very long
Yeah.
question. Sorry.
So, yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is that for many of us in the global north or in more privileged contexts, we really don't have very strong energy literacy. So many of us, and this is kind of a success of modern energy systems based in fossil fuels. For folks in the global north, our energy system is quite invisible to us. If you're relatively privileged, right? You plug in your charger to charge your phone, no problem. You heat or cool your home. You don't necessarily think about it, maybe a little bit if you're refueling your car or paying your electricity bill, right? So one thing is like we just need to increase energy literacy, especially for folks in the global north. And that includes basic knowledge. It also includes thinking about our values related to energy and also our behavior. And the goal is to become more active and aware and responsible energy citizens, not only as individuals, but as part of a wider community. But it's really hard because if you don't have basic literacy in your energy system, then there's not much you can do from there. But I love to talk about co-benefits with my students, my undergraduate students. I tell them, they complain if they don't have a car or if they don't have air conditioning. And I say, look, when you're a student, it could be the happiest time of your life. You may be poor by their standards, but you live in a walkable community. You live close to friends. You don't need a car to get around when you're living on a residential campus. So I try to talk about how you can be healthier, happier, spend less money, all of these co-benefits by basically using less energy. So there are kind of all these payoffs that we see, or in the case of the Polish anti-smog movement, they are, once you have transitioned your heating system away from a coal burning system, again, you're healthier, your whole city and neighborhood is healthier, you're spending less money on imported coal from Russia, you're spending less money on buying fuel, or if you're using a heat pump, you're spending less money on your natural gas bill. So co-benefits are really important. But I think energy literacy, especially for those of us in the global north, needs to be very important. And we need to kind of make connections between our behavior and what those implications are in other places, but also appealing to people's self-interest. There are so many benefits available if you switch to a greener energy source, or better yet, use less energy, do more with less energy. So I don't know if I answered the question, but it is tricky, and I know, Anna, you do research on sustainable consumption, so I'm sure you have a lot of insight on this as well. But the other thing to think about is embodied energy, like how much energy is tied up in all the products we use, including food we buy, if it's from further away, if it uses, a petrochemical kind of complex to produce it. So a lot of our clothing is literally made of oil, right? If it's polyester. So really thinking about our whole energy footprint and the embodied energy in our whole lifestyle, in a way that is not overwhelming or paralyzing, but thinking about, okay, what are some practices me and my community could do to shrink that footprint? So I always talk to students about, well, where does your university or college purchase its products? Are those sustainable, labor-friendly products? If not, how could we change them so that it's not just on the individual?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I agree with you. Okay, as we explained at the beginning of the interview, after graduation, you serve as an asylum officer for the USA Department of Homeland Security. You adjudicated 100 asylum seekers cases and gained experience in non-adversarial trauma-informed interview techniques. Can you explain us better your job, please? and how this former professional experience helped you to work in academia.
Yes, so yes, I served as an asylum officer, and what that meant was I interviewed people who applied for asylum in the US. So what that means is they requested humanitarian protection. They were basically telling the US government, hey, I need protection. I'm a refugee. And so I would conduct the legal interviews and see if they met the legal definition of refugee. And if they did, I could grant them asylum, which means that they had a way to stay in the US and eventually become a citizen. And the reason I did this work was actually the federal government, the US federal government funded my dissertation research in Poland. And in exchange, I owed them a year of public service in a national security related field. And so even though I didn't intend to go into immigration specifically, the skills are very overlapping between my geographic research and this job. And they include things like qualitative interviewing. And Anna, earlier you asked what was meant by non-adversarial trauma-informed interviewing. So what I was doing in this position with the government is listening to the worst things that has ever happened to people, right? People who were severely harmed, scared for their life, tortured in many cases, who came to the US asking for help, right? So we got excellent training on how to interview someone who has experienced horrific trauma. What are the best practices, including, by the way, children and unaccompanied minors who somehow ended up in front of me, with an asylum case. So, how do you interview someone who has experienced so much harm and get the information that you need to decide the case, but not inflict too much more harm through the retelling of the story? So how do you walk someone through an interview? And non-adversarial just meaning it's not like a court case where I was a judge and I was interrogating the applicant. I was there to just collect testimony in a non-adversarial way. So it was not to create conflict, but just to get a full legal record so we could make a determination on whether they qualified for protection. And honestly, the skills were very aligned with academic skills. And in fact, interviewing, geographic research, I had to do a lot of research to see if what they were telling me was accurate in relation to the conditions in the country they came from. I had to do a lot of legal research, which I had done in graduate school and continue to do to this day. So a lot of research, and then writing. Believe it or not, this job helped me be a more efficient writer because you had, a certain deadline to decide a case, write the decision, and submit it. And it didn't have to be perfect. It didn't have to be exhaustive. You just had to justify your decision and submit it to your supervisor. So coming back into academia, it feels like a huge privilege and much lower stakes because I have the privilege to talk about ideas with my students. It's a lot less pressure. The previous job was if if something bad happens to this person, if they get sent back to their country, that's kind of my responsibility. So it was very high stakes and humanitarian, very difficult work, trauma stories every day. And that leads to a specific kind of fatigue and burnout. So I was very lucky and happy to kind of come back to academia. Now, I do teach a class about global migration, and we have a substantial unit on refugees and asylum seekers. So I get to kind of teach about my experience there. And unfortunately, that humanitarian infrastructure has been sort of crumbling in the US under the current administration. So it's very difficult to kind of, as a humanitarian, to sort of watch what's happening, not only to the US asylum system, but to European asylum systems as well, where people who really need help and whose harms are related to a kind of longer colonial legacy are not getting the protection they need. So at least I get to teach my students about migration and about these issues. And still talk about them and talk about my experience. And I find that students are really keen to learn about you know, what I did as a real life practitioner in the government. So I still use a lot of those skills, and it was a very meaningful, interesting job where I used a lot of the same skills that I use in my research, but maybe just like 10 times more intensity, I would say.
Mhm. Of course, intensity is the word, because just deciding about the future of someone is a bit stressful, of course, just to say something. Yeah. But at the same time, I like how you were capable to include all your skills to do your job in the homeland security. So, Tiffany, you work in a fascinating field of interest, and you also spread your knowledge with these topics in geographical associations, as the one that you mentioned, the small group of of the energy geographers. So, do you consider that geography has a leading role in topics of peace and energy? And what can we do better?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do. We should. We need to keep more explicitly making those connections. Geography is really unique in that kind of integrated science way of physical and social, physical and human geography. Um, that's the way you have to study energy, because it has the physical technical component as well as the social component. So we already have this interdisciplinary and integrated science, and spatial tools are very, very important, not only mapping where energy resources are. Mapping applications can be used for different conflicts around where to site a facility or something like that. But also, increasingly, we're making the argument, me and some colleagues, we need to map consumption behavior too, because that's part of the energy justice picture as well. So spatial tools like mapping or concepts like scale are very, very important. And there is also a much, much smaller thread in geography called, I guess I would call it peace geographies or geographies of peace. And I think one of the big names there would be Sarah Koopman. So I highly recommend anything that she's written. But geographies of peace, it kind of comes out of a critique of political geography and geopolitics. And the critique was, you guys are too focused on war and militarism and violence, direct violence, but we need to study and highlight how peace is created through and in space. So what does peacemaking look like? And so that's why, so this is sort of a feminist critique of geopolitics. And, you know, that's why I look at the grassroots and from the bottom up, you know, there's actually a lot more peace building going on than we might think if we just look at the mainstream narratives. And similarly, the field of peace and conflict studies has in recent years had a spatial turn, and they're more interested in kind of local practices as well. And so there's a real opportunity. There's a recent Geography Compass article that's a good review of kind of the spatial turn in peace and conflict studies. That was really helpful for me to read. So it's sort of like this field kind of comes in waves when there are energy crises, but it has yet to kind of really gel and make a more distinct name for itself. So I think there's tons more work to do to make some of these connections. But absolutely geography and especially the EESG, which is the Energy and Environment Specialty Group, they you know, our leaders should continue to be leaders as we, you know, continue to, you know, look at these huge and difficult challenges that, you know, we're all facing in different ways in different places. So yeah, I mean, of course I'm biased toward geography, but I do think geography is really uniquely positioned here um to kind of think about these issues and craft hope and solutions, if we want to use that term, on how we can, build a peaceful and sustainable society. That is all of our goals, I think, as geographers. I mean, that's definitely my goal and what I want to teach my students.
Okay, so now we have finished the main part of the interview, and now we would like to ask you other questions, more personal questions, which will allow our audience to know you a little better. Okay, the first one is, can you give us the name of a historical figure who made you an impression?
Yeah, this is such a hard question.
Yeah.
But the first one, so I'm just going to tell you the first one, the earliest one I can think of, which is Saint Joan of Arc. And, I'm not religious anymore, really, but I grew up Catholic, and we had to, pick a saint name for our confirmation name. So you pick an additional name. And when I was younger, like in middle school, I took an acting class, and I got to do a monologue of Saint Joan and her speech when she was imprisoned. And I probably still have that monologue memorized. And I also selected her as my confirmation saint that I did a lot of research on. So she was probably the earliest figure that made an impression on me. And, she's a female hero in France, and, she defied gender norms. And so she was one of the earliest, I guess, historical figures that made an impression on me. But this is a really hard question. It's hard to pick just one person. So I'll just maybe leave it at that, just to keep it brief.
So a historical female scientist?
Yeah, so I would have to say Rachel Carson, who she kind of she wrote Silent Spring, of course, in 1962 or so. And she was drawing attention to like toxic chemicals and pesticides in the environment. And she really kind of raised a lot of people's consciousness about, I believe she was a biologist, probably a conservation biologist. So she raised people's consciousness about toxics in the environment. And another one that people maybe don't know as much about, and she's still alive, her name is Luella Kenny. She's one of the women, and she was trained as a scientist, I believe as a cancer researcher. She was one of the mothers who lived at Love Canal, which was one of the biggest environmental disasters, and in that kind of early environmental movement period in the US. Unfortunately, her son died due to toxic chemical exposure because his school and their whole neighborhood near Niagara Falls was built on a chemical dump where a chemical company had dumped chemicals. And so Luella Kenny, to this day, continues to educate people, her and the other mothers that lived in that neighborhood whose family members got sick. They devoted their entire lives to this kind of environmental toxics fight and to honoring the memory of their, dead family members. And, it just is striking that it's the women and the mothers who are doing so much important environmental activist work and doing work to take care of our planet. And I still see that in my current research on indigenous resistance to pipelines. It's like the women that are really the leaders and that are doing that really, really hard work, even when the government and regulators are ignoring them. But they know that something's wrong, and they keep fighting until they, are heard.
Okay. The third one is a reference in your development as a geographer.
Yeah, what do you mean by a reference? Just like a...
For someone who inspired you.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to mention my dissertation advisor. His name is Steve Herbert, and he was actually, for the most part, an ethnographer of the police and of the criminal justice system, but he did do a little bit of work on environmental regulation. But he wrote this piece, besides being an incredible advisor, he wrote this piece probably in the early 2000s called For Ethnography, and I believe it was published in Progress in Human Geography. And he really made the case that geographers need to do ethnography and take it more seriously, and that it's every bit as scientific as other methods. And so his ethnographic work and his writing, beautiful writer, has always been really inspiring to me. And the other person I have to mention is Laura Pulido. She's based on the west coast of the US, and basically everything she's ever written about environmental justice, starting with the US farm workers movement, all the way through today. She's now writing about the political ecology of the far right and the rise of white nationalism. So she's thinking about racial capitalism and helping us really understand what's going on. And she's also a beautiful, crisp, clear writer. So just would read and reread anything Laura Pulido has ever written. And she's just has a really sharp analysis on really timely issues always. So those are the two. Again, I could talk to you all day about this, but those are the two that immediately rise to the top.
You double the preferences always.
It's really hard to answer these questions, like name
Yeah.
one thing that is like the thing.
Perfect.
It's really hard.
It's always better. So I think that, yeah, a book or reading. I think you already mentioned some of them.
Oh, I'm gonna just pull. So there's this
Okay.
one I have to recommend. It's pretty old by now. It's called Green Illusions: The Dirty Secrets to Clean Energy and the Future of Environmentalism. It's written by Ozzy Zayner. It was published over 10 years ago, I would say 20, maybe 12 or 13. But I still assign it to my students in my energy geography class. And even though some of the numbers and technology kind of snapshots in time are outdated, talking about battery technology or other things, the fundamental argument is still very resonant, and that is we can't be seduced by technology, and we can't think that there's a silver bullet technology that's going to save us. And even renewable energy, even wind turbines, solar, solar technology that produces electricity, that is still based in a material mining economy, a commodity chain that is environmentally invasive. These are still materials. This is still energy and materials being used. So he's really critiquing this idea that we need to just keep producing more and more energy and just substitute technology. He's really talking about how a green economy is smaller and does more with less energy. So he's really putting forward an energy efficiency argument, an energy conservation argument, and he really is kind of taking the environmental movement to task for supporting things like electric vehicles when cars are a problem, he argues anyway, because of all the infrastructure and space that they take up. So it's a really compelling argument. It's a bit devastating to my students who might come into my class saying they're pro-solar, and we really unpack, well, like, what does that mean? That's kind of actually an absurd argument that you're pro a specific technology. So this book kind of talks about that there are sort of aches and pains no matter what technology you're using. And even just the basic fact that renewable energy literally takes up more space across the land or the water, right? That's a trade-off with a very compact fossil fuel burning plant. That's a spatial trade-off. So even just those kind of basics to get students really thinking critically about there are pros and cons to every energy type, and what does real environmentalism look like? And he even has this term, he calls it affluenza. So again, this idea that having more stuff is not what's going to make you happy. The consumer economy and advertising, these are all problems, and the environmental movement needs to take those things into account. So it's a very provocative, almost kind of cheeky, well-written book that I still assign, even though some of the statistics and information in terms of the technology has not quite kept up with the times, but we just kind of discuss some updates. So that's a book that has stuck with me, I guess for quite a while now, almost a decade, which is kind of scary.
Okay, thanks a
But
lot.
very interesting book, yeah.
A typical dish from your hometown or village?
Oh, okay. A typical dish from, okay, so a couple things that are really unique to Minnesota, which I'm not from here, but Minnesota is, what's unique here is wild rice, which is grown in a lot of the lakes in the northern part of the state, and it's considered like a sacred spiritual food for the Anishinaabe people, so that's very special. Another Minnesotan kind of specificity is Hmong food. The Hmong people, there's a big Hmong diaspora here. They're like a stateless people that, you know, Minnesota and California have the largest Hmong population in the US. So they make this purple sticky rice, which is incredible. But my hometown is Chicago, and my parents are from Poland. So a typical dish in Chicago, Polonia, would be, you know, Polish food. So maybe like pierogi, which are dumplings that are filled with different fillings in the summer with fruits. My favorite are filled with potato and cheese. And yeah, you just eat them with a lot of butter and fried onions. It's delicious. Very good food for cold winters. Yeah.
My favorite pierogi are made with mushrooms and cabbage.
Yes.
They are absolutely delicious. But I don't want to eat this stuff outside. I want to just to get the feeling.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I don't want to have the hybrids. I want the inside. So an unforgettable route or place, and it can be local or it can be Poland or in the United States.
I would have to say it's kind of cliche, I guess, but I would have to say recently I went to Venice a few years ago with my dad, and you know, as an energy geographer, that is a very fascinating car-free amphibious city. So it was fascinating to both to fly in and see the aerial view, and to think about the transportation system and also all the implications. So yeah, Venice I think is very, very, very unique as a completely car-free city. And I don't know if there's anything like it anywhere. Unless, you know, I guess there's been some replicas made of Venice in various places, but
But I think except the gondolas, the other means of so the boats and the vaporetto, they also take some fuel, right? I don't know.
yeah,
But
I'm
at least the
sure.
gondolas
Yeah.
have the ones with their energy.
But you know, even just seeing like their bus, so a boat, a form of public transportation in Venice, or seeing the way they pick up trash in boats, just it kind of did something to my, you know, American brain, because we're so seeped in car culture. So it was very unique to see public transit in Venice.
Okay, so we have finished the interview. Before I thank you, I would like also to thank Laura Sunavor because she put us together. And I think we got here a wonderful time, and it was so interesting. And you look so clever, and you are so clever, and you have this really well structured mind. And I think we love listening to you and to have you here now, storage all this information in our YouTube channel and also in our website. So thanks, Laura, and also, of course, thanks, Tiffany, for being with us this hour. And yeah, we have learned a lot, and it was really, really fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yes, thanks to Laura, and I hope we stay in touch. Thank you for the conversation.
Of course, if you come to Spain, of course, come to Alicante
Okay.
and visit us, please.
Yeah, likewise. If you're ever in the US or if you ever come visit Minnesota, please, yeah, let's connect.
Minnesota is one of the places that I always look for the temperatures, and I like to see that you have these big storms, snowstorms. It's like, for me, it's a place that I don't know if I will go, but of course, I always check in the temperatures.
Well, they are getting more mild over time, so
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a great place and people love winter here. They really do. They embrace it. So no one has taken me up on visiting during winter yet. People are kind of nervous about it, but it's really beautiful. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot, Tiffany. Bye bye.